I give the call to the member for Clark.
And I thank the Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise to give voice to the millions of Australians confronting and often struggling through the current housing crisis, and also to call on the government to establish a Royal Commission to scrutinise the matter and recommend a blueprint to address it. Now, Deputy Speaker, a crisis there really is right now. It is undeniable. For a start, there's a chronic shortage of emergency accommodation, obviously for women and their children fleeing domestic violence, but more broadly for men and women, children right across the country who are in emergency need of accommodation for countless reasons. Likewise, Deputy Speaker, there's a chronic shortage of public housing. By some estimates, the country is short some 640,000 public dwellings. Now, credit to the government. The government has pledged to create 30,000 additional homes over 5 years, but I think it's self-evident that that will do little to avert the crisis. In fact, we'll be lucky to keep up with the annual growth in the shortfall of public houses around Australia. Of course, renting is now out of reach for many people, or for those who aren't managing to hold down a rental, it's at the expense of other life necessities. It's interesting to note that rents are increasing 7 times faster than wages growth on average around Australia. Purchasing a home is hardly any better an option, and by some estimates, or by some calculations, prices in Australia to buy a house on average are still some 15% higher than pre-COVID, when an average is taken across the combined capital cities. No wonder, Deputy Speaker, there are so many people homeless around Australia. In fact, in fiscal year 21-22, there was something like 100,000 Australians sought specialist homeless support, which was up some 9% on the previous year, which makes us wonder just how many people are homeless right now. Something north of 100,000 people homeless in one of the richest and most fortunate countries in the world. Importantly, Deputy Speaker, of those homeless, about a quarter are people aged between 12 and 24, again in one of the richest and most fortunate countries in the world. And of course, Tasmania is not immune, and in some cases is worse off than the mainland states. When it comes to a crisis accommodation, Deputy Speaker, I take the example of the Hobart Women's Shelter, who last financial year took 1,182 calls for help, but 943 of them were turned away. So, a rough order of magnitude, Hobart Women's Shelter was only able to provide accommodation for about a fifth of the women, often with children, who were crying out for urgent help. When it comes to public housing, Deputy Speaker, in Tasmania currently, there's about 4,500 people on the public housing waiting list out of a state with a population of only about 500,000. And on average, it's taking almost 80 weeks to house a priority applicant, not all or any applicant, almost 78 weeks to house a priority applicant. When it comes to rental affordability, Deputy Speaker, things are no better. In fact, as per the Rental Affordability Index, Greater Hobart continues to be the country's least affordable metropolitan area, with the median rent having increased by 60% since 2016. And according to Shelter Tas CEO Paddy Chugg, our rents in Hobart are now 11% higher than the median rent in Melbourne. I mean, this is a remarkable piece of information, Deputy Speaker, that rents in Hobart are 11% higher than the median rent in Melbourne. Deputy Speaker, then there's the homeless situation in Tasmania, and it is certainly no better than the figures I've quoted for elsewhere around Australia. In fact, Tasmania's homelessness rate is increasing faster than anywhere else in the nation. And on census night in 2021, 2,350 people in Tasmania said they were experiencing homelessness, compared with 1,622 on census night 5 years earlier. So in 5 years, that's an extra 728 Tasmanians becoming homeless in a state of only 500,000 people. Perhaps the next statistic is the most chilling of the lot, Deputy Speaker. On census night in 2021, there were 569 children under the age of 18 who were homeless, including 325 children under the age of 12. Deputy Speaker, this is a humanitarian tragedy as much as it is a housing crisis. But, Deputy Speaker, there's no shortage of solutions. There is no shortage of solutions whatsoever. It's just a case of having some ambition, being prepared to take some risks, being bold, spend some political capital and make sometimes controversial decisions. That's what's needed. For example, why doesn't the government increase Commonwealth rent assistance by 50%? It could do it in the budget coming up in a couple of months' time. Investing in more crisis accommodation, investing in more public and social housing, more supported accommodation for people with specific needs, extending the National Rental Affordability Scheme instead of letting it slowly wind up over the next handful of years, reining in short-stay accommodation and returning it to its original model of making spare rooms available. I remind you, Deputy Speaker, it's called Airbnb because the origin was an airbed and breakfast, an airbed on a bit of spare floor in the lounge room, or maybe the spare room or the granny flat. That's what it was all about. But now we see in Tasmania hundreds of long-term rentals being converted basically to a holiday accommodation, and the losers are the long-term residents of the city. There I go there. Rein in negative gearing and get rid of the capital gains tax concession on investment properties. That's what all the experts are suggesting we do. We just get rid of the capital gains tax concession and rein in negative gearing. Now, sure, people have made investment decisions in good faith over years, it would likely be good that we perhaps grandfather current arrangements or cap future arrangements in the future. There are ways through this which are politically achievable if the government is prepared to go there and to educate the community and explain the need, explain the unfairness, and still protect people who have made historic investment decisions. Perhaps a vacant property tax, something that state governments could also consider, so that we get rid of the— I know in Tasmania there are thousands of empty homes. This is crazy when we've got a homelessness crisis. Around Australia there must be tens of thousands, I don't know, 100,000 at a guess, empty homes. Or perhaps we put a tax disincentive on the owners there to get them to make sure they put someone in those homes and accommodation. Which brings me back to the start of this short speech, Deputy Speaker. I want to give voice to the people who are suffering through this. Many of them don't have a voice. You know, they just quietly go about their business and do the best they can. Mum and the kids in a car park late at night, trying their best to stay warm and stay out of the rain. The thousands of people who are couch surfing, living in the garden shed of a friend's place or in the garage. They don't have a voice. Well, I'm giving them a voice, and I feel I speak for a lot of my colleagues in this House when I do this. And I make the point again. This is something that warrants a Royal Commission. Now, I'm the first to say to people, we've got to stop calling for a Royal Commission at the drop of a hat. As soon as there's a problem, someone says, let's have a Royal Commission. Obviously, Royal Commission should be reserved for the most pressing matters and the most important matters, like Aboriginal deaths in custody, banking and financial services, veteran suicides, aged care. What other ones are going on at the moment? Institutional child sexual abuse. Well, I would add to that homelessness, because homelessness in this country, Deputy Speaker, has now reached an absolute crisis point, and maybe a Royal Commission would provide a non-political way to explore it. Maybe a Royal Commission could come up with recommendations that would unlock this and give the government licence to go places which currently it is too timid to go to, like getting rid of the concession on the capital gains tax, like reining in some way, or even doing away with negative gearing. Maybe it would give the government the out to say, well, OK, this isn't our political decision. This isn't something we've dreaded since 2019. This is something that an independent inquisitor has looked at and found to have merit. That's what we need, Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the call to the member for